Welcome to my podcast, Shaping Your Journey. My name is Aldo Matza, inviting you to listen in conversations with friends, artists, professionals, and experts in our music world. Today, I have the wonderful opportunity to finally catch up with my good friend, David Stanoch. It took a while, but we finally did it.
Sure.
Thank you, David.
Yes, sir. We've been talking about
Thanks.
this for about a year.
Oh, man. And then chasing, this was like a wild goose chase. But when you're busy, and then we finally got it together. So I'm super happy. Before we talk about on the topic of shaping your journey and all the decisions and all those crossroads we come across in our trajectory, tell us first, where did it start for you? What was that first spark? What started it for you? What was it that pushed you into this wonderful world?
Yeah, initially it was just a love of music that was in the household. It's interesting. Life circumstances have brought me back into this space, which is the house that I grew up in.
Wow.
And yeah, and it's very interesting because like right now, my school, my online and on-site teaching school, the David Stanoch School of Drumming is located in the basement of this house, and that's the very first place I ever played a set of drums. And really, what happened was I have an older brother named John, and he and I just grew up loving music and in those days listening to the radio and watching different programs on TV like Ed Sullivan and Johnny Carson and the Midnight Special and ABC in Concert are some that I can remember from those days, and buying 45s and 33s and my brother at one point when he was 10 excuse me, decided that he wanted to take guitar lessons, and my parents looked at me and they said, well, do you want to take guitar lessons? And I think at that point, I just kind of wanted to be like my older brother, and so I got into it. And so we started studying in town at a local music school with a private teacher. And at 7, I liked it. I was pretty young, but my teacher was a good teacher, and he taught me how to read. He taught me basic theory. I learned scales, major, minor, modes. I learned notation. I learned, everything that you're going to learn with reading, note values and the staff and the dynamics and all the kind of stuff like that. But at 7 years old, I could comprehend that stuff pretty easily. But I had hand-eye coordination problems when it came to looking at the notes on the page and then trying to find the fingerings and everything on the guitar. And so my teacher started to suggest that in the popular music that some of the songs we were playing was based on, I listened to the beat, I listened to the sound of the drums, and so I started doing that. And then at the same time, my brother was advancing pretty quickly, and he put together a little garage band that was actually more like a basement band. They would come downstairs and rehearse in the same basement I was just talking about a minute ago. And I would watch them. And there was a drummer in that band whose name I'll mention. His name is Matt Barber, and he's still an active professional in our community here in the Twin Cities. He's a co-owner of a great music venue called the Chanhassen Dinner Theaters, which runs, Broadway type shows regularly in one theater, and then has like concert stage theater acts in another one. I just played there on Sunday. But Matt was the drummer in John's band. So there was he had a Ludwig Standard kit that, he left down there. Right. And I remember one day they took a break. They probably came upstairs here to shoot some hoops in the driveway or get some lemonade or something. It was in the summertime. And I just decided to sit behind Matt's kit and see if I could imitate some of the things I saw him do. And I mean, I guess maybe I was like Earl Palmer or Hal Blaine the first time I sat behind the drum set, in the sense that, like, what did I do? I went digga 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 ba ba boom boom ba boom 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 ba ba boom boom ba. I suppose today's Halloween. Yeah. Today it's October. It's Halloween season. It's like the Monster Mash. It was like the Monster Mash beat. And so that was it. And then they all came down and looked at me because I wouldn't stop, and I could actually kind of make it work. And so after that, I was hooked. And about that time, I was going into, I think, like fourth grade when you could sign up for school band. And so, my brother was already in the band playing clarinet because he was a few years ahead of me. And then my mom asked me, what do you want to do? And I said, well, I want to play the drums. And they said, okay. So when it came to be sign-up day, I remember going to the band director and telling him I wanted to play the drums. And he said, we have enough drummers, so why don't you play trumpet?
David, I gotta stop. Hold on where you're going, because
Sure.
that's amazing. So my story, okay,
Yeah.
I was an altar boy, and then in the church when I left that, there was a band, a marching band practicing in the basement. So I went down, and I was crazy about drumming, and I played a little bit, and I said I want to join the band, and the director said, what do you want to play? And I said, drums. He said, well, we have enough drummers. Why don't you play bugle? So I played bugle first, and then I would go to the rehearsals before and ask the drummers, show me some things so that if ever you guys don't show up, I'll know what you're playing. Of course, that never happened. I never played drums in that band, but that's a great story.
But you stayed on top of your true desire, your wish there. That's really good. I came home from band that day, or school, after having talked to the band director, and I told my mom what happened. And she got on the phone and called the school and talked to the band director. And she said, if my son wants to play drums, you put him in the drum section. And yeah. So
good.
Thank you, Lois, And then I started studying with a drum instructor who was at the same music school that I was taking the guitar lessons at. I have a fellow named Bob Burns, who was like a very active, kind of in the realm of his regular gigs were kind of like ragtime type, gigs in those types of days and stuff like that. So he helped me get some basics together with my hands. I remember learning some rudiments with him. We went through those Roy Burns reading books,
Right.
the good one and the blue one, but our chemistry wasn't that great, and he was a good man, and I knew him in later years and stuff like that. But I think at the age I think I felt like he was a little too strict for me, and it wasn't that much fun. So my parents started, we thought about finding another teacher, and that turned out to be Elliot Fine.
Oh, so that's when you started with Elliot.
Studying with Elliot when I was 10.
Wow, at 10?
Yeah. 10. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. And I'll tell you what, Aldo, it's like, how did it all come together? Well, I was a pretty quick learner. I mean, like my guitar teacher, whose name was Wally Bramberg, he did well with teaching me fundamentals of music in general. And so when I remember when I first started reading drum music, at first it seemed much simpler than guitar because there were just less notes to look at on the staff, and I've had this same problem with piano and even to an extent mouth percussion. I still have that hand-eye thing, but with 10 fingers on the piano and the fingers on the guitar, I don't have the same type of comfort coordination-wise that I can do with 4 limbs. I found out it was much easier for me to adapt with 4 limbs, and so I kind of took to it really quickly. And Elliot was. I mean, he was hysterical. He was a great guy that you would look forward to going to see, and he was inspiring. And so the chemistry was really great, and I learned very quickly. And he actually put me on my first professional job when I was 12.
Wow.
And
nice.
Yeah, I got to sub for a drummer in town at a dinner theater show. I think they were doing like funny thing happened on the way to the Forum or something like that. And whoever the drummer was knew Elliot and needed a sub one winter night because something was going on with him, and they had tried to get somebody and they couldn't. And Elliot said, "Call my student." And they were like, "He's 12." And Elliot was like, "It's not going to be a problem. Call him." And so
nice.
I went in and I did it, and after that, it was kind of like, wow, I mean, that was fun. That was cool. I was with all these older people, and at first they were looking at me like, what are you doing here? and but then they warmed up to the fact that they could see I was serious, and I was able to make the show work, and I mean, it wasn't like we were sitting in the pit in New York, but I
Right.
mean, at the same time, they didn't have any trouble with me at all. We were able to get through the
Beautiful.
whole show, and I mean, so at that point in time, it was then just a couple of years later, it was time to go into the high school jazz ensemble, and we had an excellent program there. I could get into a lot of details there that may come up, but I can tell you this. I mean, if we flashed forward from that moment, getting started with Elliot, and the doors that started to open for me then, and then the passion that it opened up in me, and how I became very drawn to it. Um, my high school band director was a gentleman named Dan Geldert. He had a great program, and we had students who were very talented, and Dan was really good at bringing in pros for clinics and stuff like that. So like we had the Woody Herman band, and we had a lot of we had some different great trumpet players. Like I got to play with like Lynn Viviano, who was a lead player for Maynard and Buddy, and Bobby Shue, who did a lot of the same thing and did like a lot of the motion picture soundtracks and television stuff out in Los Angeles. And they were all very instructive. And then my senior year, Dan brought in Ed Shaughnessy. And Elliot knew Ed very well, because at that point in time, now this is, 30, 35 years ago or so, the Tonight Show with Johnny Carson was still kind of in its heyday, and Doc Severinsen was directing the NBC orchestra. And Doc was also a pops conductor for a few different symphony orchestras around the country, I think in Milwaukee and in Scottsdale, Arizona, and here in the Twin Cities with the Minnesota Orchestra. And so Ed was always coming with Doc to do these pop concerts. And so Elliot, and I want to also mention Marv Dahlgren, because Marv was also a key figure in my life. And of course, the two of them together wrote Four-Way Coordination, which is one of our Bibles. Elliot and Marv were working with Ed, several times a year, or, over the years and all that and stuff like that. So they got to know him. So here's what happened. There was Ed was scheduled to be a guest artist at a concert nearby in Wisconsin, at Eau Claire, Wisconsin, a month before he was going to be the guest artist with us in the spring. And Elliot said, you should go see Ed, and you should ask him if you can play together with him at your spring jazz concert. I said, okay. And then Elliot said, and Elliot had this type of vision. I'll tell you more about that in a minute too. Elliot said, and he'll say no, because he doesn't know you. And he doesn't want to get himself into something that,
Of course.
He said, and that's when you tell him you're my student. And I said, yeah. And he said, yeah. So I go see the show, and there's Ed. It's like seeing a rock star, in those days. There's Ed. He's got his big white Ludwig kit, man. And he's, and he's doing his thing, and the medallion and the lamb chops and that smile and kicking that band. And so it's over, and I go backstage, and I wait my turn, and then I get there, and I say, yeah, Mr. Shaughnessy? Yeah. And I say, yeah, my name's David Stanoch. Hey, Dave, how you doing? I said, good, man. I said, you're going to be the guest artist next month, and he, oh, yeah, coming up. And I said, so, I wanted to know if maybe, you would like to play a duet with me. And you know what, Aldo? This was about a month. I must have been crazy, because this was really about a month after that duet with Buddy and Ed on the Tonight Show first aired. That you can see that on YouTube now. I remember watching that in real time, right? And here I am saying, oh yeah, can I play with you, right? And he puts his arm on me, and he goes, well, kid, hey, and I can't say, I don't know. Let's just wait and see what happens at the thing. And I said, that's fine, Mr. Shaughnessy. I said, my teacher told me that you would say that when I asked you. And he said, and that's when he told me I should tell you that my teacher is Elliot Fine, and he sent me. And Ed's eyes got really big, and he said, you're Elliot's student? And he gave me a bear hug, and he said, man, we're going to have a great time.
Beautiful.
Yeah. Beautiful. I mean, and then we did. I mean, the whole thing, Ludwig sent his drums up from Chicago. They asked me to set them up for him before he arrived. And when I got there, or no, when he got there, the first thing he said is, he says, "Where's that drummer?" I said it like that, you know? And I was kind of like, right here. And he says, you know how cats are, they're playing games, right? He says, would you come over here for a second, please? And I'm like, uh-oh, you know, sure. I walk over there. He said, "This is the first time in my entire career that Ludwig has sent me a drum set anywhere, and I could have walked into the room and sat down and played it, and everything would have been exactly where I needed it." He said, "How did you do that?" And I said, "Well, I looked at pictures of your setup in downbeat and sat there and just tried to figure it out. I watch you on TV. I sat there and tried to figure it out, you know?"
Nice.
And he was really impressed by that, you know. And then he did a great clinic for us, and then we had the rehearsals and the concert, and it worked out great. And as it was all ending and we were getting a standing ovation in a sold out theater for the spring concert, when it was over our piece together, he said to me, he said, "Okay, Dave," he said, "now you got to pass it on." He said, "Buddy told me to pass it on, and now I'm telling you, you got to pass it on."
Nice,
And I
nice.
was just like, you know, wow.
Yeah.
It was
And
very exciting, you know.
yeah, no,
And but
and
then
those
I already knew that was the way I was going to go. But that kind of positive reinforcement, you know, and that kind of support from those types of people was invaluable encouragement.
yeah, no, that's, I mean, getting to the point of, I mean, Elliot Fine, I only knew him when you introduced me to him at one of those PAS
Yeah.
events. And of course, I had not gone through his book. That's impossible. But I still work on his book. But I mean, he totally melted my brain, you know, trying to work on that book. And I
Mhm.
still use it, and it was great to meet him. But you know, here's the great point about that. When you meet someone of that level and who really gets it and is respected and knows. And I had the same experience with my teacher at the university at McGill, Pierre Belus. He played in the symphony. He was a jazz drummer. Like, he was everything. He was Canada's contemporary music guru. And
Nice.
then whenever anybody who ever studied with him, there was no question. That's all you had to say. Well, you didn't have to say, because he would call. He says, "I'm sending you my student." No questions asked, no auditions, and I did a lot of work that way. That's how I got into, you know, part of the world in the local scene, because I had repercussion going. Then he was pushing me on one side, sending me to sub for him with symphony. Then I would sub for him for, you know, Broadway shows that came through, and there was never any question. And you know, you're the little guy, so it's
Mhm.
the same thing. So, I mean, I think it's really important when you get to a level of that kind of respect, and also for us to respect those people who have really opened
Oh
the
my
door.
gosh.
And
Yeah.
it's a tremendous thing having those people, no matter what
That's
talent and what
that's
work we
that's
do.
exactly right, you know. And even Ed, you know, a couple years before it happened with Ed, that was my senior year of high school. My sophomore year of high school, I auditioned for a youth symphony that would tour Europe through the summer. And it was mostly college level kids, but it was open to high school kids. And it was called America's Youth in Concert. It was based out of Washington, D.C. And these were different times, you know. This was the mid 70s, you know, or actually late 70s, probably 1978 was the year that I traveled. And I auditioned via tape and was given material to work out, which I worked out with Elliot, you know, because I had to work out some timpani and some mallets and some snare drum and even a little bit of drum set. And the audition came back. I had a friend who played violin, and he had auditioned and was going to go, and we would go to band camp together. He also played clarinet, and he said, "You should go on this." And I knew somebody who had done it the year before, and he goes, "Yeah." They were like, "Yeah, do it." So I auditioned. I was 16. I came back, and they gave me the principal percussion chair.
Wow,
And
nice.
yeah, and which was kind of cool because one part of our program, it was the orchestra and a choir, and one part of our program was we did a Dvorak symphony all the way through. And of course, if you're principal percussionist, you're playing the timpani, and then I'm playing, and everybody else is sitting there, right? But just as an aside, everybody learned that part, and I told the director, I said, I don't want to do this every night. I wouldn't want to be sitting there. I made sure everybody in the section got to play it, because we were playing in different cities through Europe, But so we went to Rider College in Princeton and New Jersey to rehearse. And then we played a concert at Carnegie Hall in New York, and walking in there and walking on that stage and thinking about, I already had, at 16, I was in deep, man. I had the Goodman stuff and the Chicago stuff and, lots of stuff that had been recorded at Carnegie Hall. And to walk on that stage was so exciting. And I got to play drum set on a Ellington suite. And it also turned out that two of the people involved with the orchestra, our conductor, who was a gentleman named Dr. Marvin Rabin, and a gentleman named Les Themig, who was commissioned to write an original piece for us. They were both on faculty at UW-Madison. When I got back from this concert tour and all the places that we played, I knew this was what I wanted to do with my life. I just knew it. There was no question about it. And I was still just a sophomore in high school. I had a couple of years left. But then senior year ed, then I went to Madison, UW-Madison in Wisconsin. And the reason I went there specifically was because the renowned great bassist Richard Davis, who just passed away a couple months ago at the age of 93, had left his 30-year career as a New York studio musician on the top of the world there, right, to take a tenured position at the university. And when what I knew getting out of high school was that my facility on the drums was good for my age. Ed actually described me as the best high school level drummer he had ever heard or played with at the concert that we played at. And and that was, I don't know if it was true, but it sure meant a lot to me to hear that. Sure. And I know it made my band director very proud, and it made Elliot very proud, because they were all there, and but it was very inspiring. So I knew my drum stuff was in good shape. I needed more help understanding how to be a good rhythm section player. And that's why I went to study with Richard Davis, because I figured the lockup between the bass and the drums, and I had all these he was the bass player for the Thad Jones Mel Lewis Orchestra. Right. And, and then he was really tight with Thad's brother, Elvin, who I know a lot of us are familiar with. Right. Yes. And they made records together like Heavy Sounds and, several others. And of course, Richard is on classic recordings like Out to Lunch with Eric Dolphy and Tony Williams. And he played, and then he did a lot of pop things. He's on a classic Van Morrison record called Astral Weeks. And he did a couple Springsteen albums. He played on At 17 with Laura Nero. That was Janice Ian. He had that platinum record in his office at the UW. He did work with Laura Nero with Andy Newmark, one of my favorite drummers, Andy Newmark. Andy Newmark. And yes. So I had all these records he was on, and I'm like, it was just intuitive. I didn't know him. I just, I thought, if I go to Berkeley or if I go to North Texas State, which at that time were the two biggest schools to go, I thought there's X amount of ensembles and there's drummers arriving by the truckload. I don't want to just, I was used to kind of being a big fish in a small pond, and I didn't want to get washed away in a sea of competition. I thought, why not go study with this bass player? Sure. Really hone in on it. And so that turned out to be one of the best decisions I ever made in my life for a lot of reasons, musical and otherwise. I developed a relationship with Richard that was incredible, but this passing it on thing, I told you what Elliot did for me with Ed. I get my foot in the door with Richard, which was actually not easy the first day, but I won him over. I knocked on his door and I said, "Hi, Mr. Davis. I'd like to sign up for the jazz program. I'm David Stanoch." He opened the door of his office like about this far. And he said, "Yeah." I said, "What semester are you?" And I said, "I'm a freshman." He said, "Okay, come back, see me when you're a sophomore." He started to close the door. And I literally put my foot in the door.
I was going to say.
And I said, "Mr. Davis, wait a second, please." I said, "I made my whole decision to come to school here based on the fact that I wanted to study with you." And he was like, "Yeah." And I said, "Just tell me what it takes." I said, I won't let you down." He said, "Okay." He said, be here tomorrow morning at 6:30 a.m. And he gave me a list of things that he wanted me to do, including have a transcribed drum solo that I could play for him. I
Wow.
had just gotten to the school with my dad like earlier that afternoon, and we were going to unpack stuff. And now it was cool. I was going to live in a house off campus because my brother went to Madison, and he was moving out of a house he was living in on campus. And I talked my parents into letting me take over the lease so I could practice and not be in a dorm. And it had to be cheaper than the dorm because it was $300 a month in the house. So all I had to do was get a roommate. You know, this is a long time ago, right?
Yes.
1980, I think. And so he was cool with that. But so I said, Dad, you know, I came out of talking to Richard and I said, I got to get this thing together. So I'd already been working on a Danny Richmond solo from a Mingus record. And I said, okay, I'm just going to finish that. And I stayed up pretty much all night and I did that. And then I went into the audition and he said, sing me 3 jazz standards. You don't have to sing the words, just sing me the melodies. No, that was fine. He quizzed me on scales and some things like that. And it was forms, you know, and I was like, I knew all that, you know, and then he put some sight reading in front of me. He put this crazy thing in front of me and I read through it and he just kind of stared at me for a minute. And he said, okay. He said, I have a great drummer in my jazz ensemble. He said, I don't like having 2 drummers in my jazz ensemble. He said, but I'm going to put you in my jazz ensemble.
Wow.
And I said, okay, wow, thank you very much. And so that was great. Now, classes start. The first week of classes, I'm sitting in a lecture class of his called Black Music History. And I'm waiting for the lecture to start. And a voice behind me, I'm sitting just like in an airplane because I'm 6'4", although I like to sit on the aisle. So I stick my leg out, you know. I'm sitting on the aisle in this auditorium where the lecture is. And all of a sudden this voice behind me says, and Richard had this deep, deep voice. He says, I didn't even know it, you know, just came up behind me. He didn't come up in front of me. I'm sitting there and all of a sudden this voice behind me says, I have a letter for you in my office from Ed Shaughnessy. And I turned and I looked and he's like right here, you know. and he says, why am I getting mail for you from Ed Shaughnessy? And I said, I have no idea. But here's what I found out. Before the Tonight Show moved to Los Angeles and Ed went with Doc and Johnny, he did lots of studio work in New York with Richard. And they were pals. And Ed said, there's a kid coming your way. Keep an eye on him. He gave me the okay. And that transformed everything, you know, because all of a sudden, I mean, you know how it is. It was just different after that. And then he could see how serious I was. And boy, did I learn a lot with him. And I asked him if I could take private lessons from him. And he's like, what would we do? And I explained all the things I wanted to work with. And he said, okay. And I dragged a set of drums up from the basement where the practice rooms were to his office on the 6th floor without a cart once a week, you know, and like the elevator and the office were at opposite ends of the, you know, and I didn't care. And I was never late. And boy, did he taught me so much. And even about life, he became like a surrogate father to me. My father was a great man and very active in my life. But when you're away from home, sometimes you feel like you want to get away from your parents for a while.
Of course.
And here was Richard helping me answer so many questions about life and all that kind of stuff like that. And then the next thing you know, I was recording with him with Ben Sidran and I was playing gigs with him. And he because he had played with all my favorite drummers, and that was one of the things that attracted me to want to study with him. I asked him one time, I said, you know, and you know what kind of a question this is, but when you're young, I said, so Richard, I said, who's your favorite drummer? I said, who's your favorite drummer to play with, you know? And he says, you're my favorite drummer. And like, I knew that wasn't true, but he said, you're my favorite drummer because you're the one I'm playing with. And I said, okay. And so that motivated me not to screw up even more, you know, but years later, long after I was out of college, I read an interview where he talked about his first big break gig coming out of Chicago, where he grew up was with Ahmad Jamal. And he was traveling with Ahmad Jamal and he was hungry to learn. And in the interview, he said, so I asked Ahmad Jamal, Ahmad, who's your favorite bass player? And he said, Ahmad said, you are, because you're the one I'm playing with. And I thought, wow, you know.
That's deep.
So
that's deep,
I've carried that forward too with the young musicians that I get to work with and mentor now, the ones that aren't drummers, you know. Because it's like, that's the thing. It's like, look, we're here right now. We're playing together right now, and this is what's important. This is what's matters. So let's keep the lines of communication open. Let's listen. Let's make a groove. Um, I can go all over the map from any point of the conversation, here. But let me, I'll take a break.
That's a good one because I mean it's really important. And sometimes people forget. Well, not that they forget; they don't know. But when you've been around a little bit and realize what the important things are, like I say to my students, always be there. Of course, on time, but
Yes.
be there. I mean, be there,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
that you're there, and that's what's happening now. That's the most important thing in your life. Yeah.
Only time Richard ever got upset with any of us at school. He came in one day. We were having a rehearsal on a Sunday. We did not expect to see him, but we had a concert coming up the next day, and it was one of our small groups. And we're college kids. We'd have been out partying the night before, but we show up at the rehearsal and we're kind of dragging ourselves through these tunes. And he came in and he listened for a minute and he stopped us and he said, "What makes you think when you walk out this door that you'll ever get the chance to play again?" He said, "I've seen people in clubs in New York get shot, get drugged, never go home, and they never thought that was going to be the last time they were going to play." He said, "So if you're serious about this," he said, "you play every note like it's the last time you're ever going to play, because that's the only way to be real about it."
Yep.
And we were, we were all like, wow, and I mean, like, so he didn't lecture us about our, he just gave us an example.
Yeah.
He gave us an example and he was stern about it. And then he left, and so, I mean, like, we sure turned that rehearsal around, and boy, did we play for real the next night at the concert, and so that was it. That was a great lesson. Be present, be in the moment, be dedicated, because you don't know if you're never, I mean, look at, I mean, it's
Jaco
sad, but I mean,
Pastorius.
Aaron Spears, Dom,
Yeah.
I mean, these are wonderful people who have given so many people so much and taken from us too soon.
Yeah. No,
And you never know.
yeah, you just never know. And also it's not just about the future, but it's the important moment. It just made me think of something because we take groups to Cuba also to perform and
It's on my bucket list to go there with you.
oh, you gotta come. It's
Yeah.
amazing. I mean, we do the workshop itself where individuals come to study with the masters, but we also take music groups like college bands and that to come down. Like last March, we had this 21-piece big band, and we purposely set them up to perform with another band down there, and this band was a little bit younger than them. These were college, so the kids in Cuba, they must have been 14, 15, 16, that area. So they played the first half of the show, and the band that we had brought down had a rehearsal warm up in the afternoon. And the attitude, they're having fun. It's a great place, new experience, new people, and all of that. And the band sounded fine. And they asked me to sit in with the band, with the other big band that we were touring with. So I was playing with them. I said, of course I'd love to play. So I did. So I'm sitting, the first band played, the Cuban band, and then all of a sudden, then the second band came on. And we're sitting there, I'm sitting there, and the conductor, when they are playing, they were just not the same band because the first band was so good. They were just that we saw everybody's eyes like all of a sudden open up so big that when they performed, only like half an hour later, they were not the same people. They were not the same band. And you could see that they suddenly realized exactly what you're talking about, that these guys mean it and they're here. And they're really here musically, and this is the moment, and they're gonna they're gonna go all in, right?
Right.
Whereas most of us, we take a lot of things for granted. We don't realize how important this moment is. And when they saw that, I remember watching the director's looking at me, and I'm going, so we're talking. He says, totally, afterwards, they even felt it themselves.
Sure.
Once they heard this band and they realized what was going on, that they were really meaning it, they went up like by 30, 40%. I mean, like amazing. So it's beautiful to see.
Yeah, inspiration, focus, I mean,
Yep.
and that's the gift of that kind of dedication, that kind of perseverance, that kind of commitment to it. Man, you fast forward to making a career in this business, and you learn, I think, pretty quick along the way that nothing is guaranteed, and that there's always changes happening in the work, and yet you've still got a mortgage to pay or whatever else. And so what are you going to do to survive? I was on the faculty of McNally Smith College of Music. I was about to start my 28th year at the school when, because of some shenanigans that were going on in the front office, they closed at the end of the semester in December of 2017 overnight. And that hurt a lot of people, and it was like, now I couldn't complain that I'd had such a good run at a university, but having a job like that made it a lot easier not to have to worry about paying my bills. And, and during those years, my children were born and all of this kind of stuff like that. But then, as soon as that door closed, I was already starting to think about what my next move would be. And that's when I went online. And, I've always performed, but there were a few years there where I actually cut back on performing because not that I stopped, but the children were young. Their mother, my ex-wife, Katie, she went through a terrible battle that she won with breast cancer. But like when that was going on, there was a lot less like going out and doing pickup gigs or things like that, because I needed to be home. I needed to be, and I needed to be at the school teaching and stuff like that. But then, and that's the thing, when you're in the moment and you're totally committed, and that this is what you want to do, then you really, to make a career out of that, you really have to become educated that way as well, and try to give every moment, just like you do on stage, the same type of energy and dedication, so you can keep the ball rolling, right? We wear lots of different hats. Yes, we're performers. And right now, my performance career is maybe busier than it's ever been. It's fantastic. I have, I run to PASIC's coming up. I run to North Carolina for 3 days. Right before that, fly home. And then the next day I turn around and I go to Indianapolis. I get back from that. And then the holiday tour starts. I'm out for 3 weeks in December, and meanwhile, my teaching practice has grown to the point where I have a waiting list. And, and so like, really, honestly, the big challenge for me is just trying to keep up with everything.
Sure.
Because I'm working more in town as well as on the road, and there's new music to assimilate every week. And there's, when I'm with my students, it's the same kind of focus. I'm here in the moment, and I give 100%, or if not more, to them. And so I'm very gratified that all of these things work so well. But yeah, without that type of commitment, without that type of focus, that's what I guess I'm getting. The point I'm trying to make is, when you commit yourself to this type of life, you have to have that kind of commitment to the performance, but it has to be there in every direction.
Sure. No.
You're going.
And also, things like, we all do many things. We're performers, we're teachers, we're students also, and we organize things. You're involved as the drum editor of PAS, that part. So getting your talents exploited, for lack of a better word, and then you wrote a book, right? These things come when that time comes. It's okay. Now I have these ideas. I must put them on paper, and I have that book. It's a great book, by the way.
I appreciate that. I have yours too. I see it on the stand back there. In fact, I have it. I was even just looking through it just before we got together. I got it right here.
Nice. Nice.
And yeah, this book, I have it here too. This has been
great book.
Like what the Vic Firth people would call a game changer for me. They had that ad campaign that was very true about that, because really, I worked on that book for 10 years. And Elliot was instrumental in really pushing me to get it done. And I did. And then I was telling you about how he was visionary. Then he predicted all these things that were going to happen. And I was just like, you're so great, Elliot. You're so supportive. Thank you very much. And everything he predicted happened. he told me, he said, self-publish it. Don't give it to another publisher. Self-publish it. And he explained why. He said because your book is going to win the Modern Readers Poll. And he said, and then they're all going to come to you, the publishers. And he says, and then you'll get a better percentage than you would if you gave it to them at first, because it's already done and all they have to do is distribute it. And I was like, oh, that sounds great, Elliot. That would be wonderful. Well, that happened. And one of the reasons it happened, I mentioned Vic's people and Perseverance, was because of Elliot got a copy of the book to Dom. Dom was working for Vic. Dom called me up out of the blue, which was a trip because I didn't really know him that well in those days. I first saw him play with Billy Cobham when I was living in Los Angeles in the late 80s. Mind blowing, right? And Dave, it's Dom Famularo, He says, I got a couple questions for you. He said, first of all, what kind of sticks are in your stick bag? And I said, well, I use Vic Firth sticks. And I said, and if I need something that Vic doesn't make, I've got some sticks by Johnny Rabb and Mike Balter. And he said, good. He said, we want you in the family. You know how it's always like the mob with the industry?
No, I had known Dom for over 30 years, and he was on permanent faculty at COSA. So yes, and China, and so we've. Yes,
and he's like, we want you in the family. We want you on the team. And of course, what an honor, and as soon as that happened, I got a letter from Vic Firth in the mail, and I still have it,
Nice.
and talking about what he thought about the book and that it would be around forever, and that he was happy that I was going to be part of his program, and all that stuff. And then they got Mark Wessels involved with me, and we did, I had an audio video companion that I had released with the self-published version of the book online, because I couldn't afford to pay for the printing for the book and put a DVD in it and recoup any kind of even small profit from the sale. So Ben Sidran, actually, who I first met through Richard Davis. This was Napster and Metallica time, and Ben's like, put it up online for free. Get in the stream. Get where people can see you. And so I did that. And so I had these videos, and then Wessels wanted to edit them, and they ran I think weekly for maybe 3 months. They ran on the Vic Firth website this, feature of the book. And then after that, I got a call one day from, at the time, John O'Reilly Jr., who was at that time the drum set guy for Alfred Music Publishing. And this was in when was it? I don't remember when it was. It was before that Readers Poll came out, but the results had been given to the companies so that they could place ads in the Modern Drummer issue congratulating, I'm learning how all this works, right?
Right.
So the guy from Alfred, John, calls me up, and he's like, hey, I just wanted to take a few minutes and get to know you, because I see your book won the Modern Drummer Readers Poll. And I was like, what? I was like, what? And he said, could you send me a copy of it? I'd like to see it, and then I got a similar call from Hal Leonard, and it was interesting. And so at that point, Elliot talked to me about negotiation. And then I also reached out to Peter Erskine, because I'd known Peter since I was a kid too, because I first met him when he was coming around with Maynard Ferguson before he joined Weather Report. And he was kind enough to just, he knew. And so I'd known him all those years, and I knew he had a track record with everybody in the education side of the business. And I was able to call him up and say, hey, what can you guide me, please? Just make sure I know what I'm thinking about and stuff like that. And so he gave me advice that got me into a distributorship with Alfred. But it was that whole thing with the Vic Firth people that gave it the exposure that made that happen,
Vic Firth was a real source. I mean, he was an engine. And I remember, and this is a funny story, because I knew Vic Firth very well, of course. and respected him because not only was it one of the great timpanists on the planet, but then he
Right.
started the stick company and beyond. It was funny because him and one of the timpanists in Montreal, who was the Montreal orchestra, the Montreal Symphony, Louis Charbonneau, they were colleagues, and they used to sub for each other. And Louis Charbonneau actually started making sticks before Vic.
Oh, wow.
Yes. And so when I moved to
Inspiration. Yeah.
Yeah, no, this is funny how these things line up. I don't believe in coincidences and how things happen.
I agree.
Louis Charbonneau was studied with Saul Goodman, who used to teach in Montreal. Okay. So there's this other lineage that was there. So Louis Charbonneau started these sticks. When I moved to Montreal to study at McGill, he was on making, and I still have his sticks. And then Louis Charbonneau, Vic first started making his as well. But they looked very similar, except Vic Firths were all much bigger, heavier, which I couldn't handle at the time, being a small guy. I'm not
Yeah.
6'4". I'm 4'6". No, I'm just kidding. But it was funny because Louis showed Vic where to make the sticks. So Vic's original sticks were made in Montreal until he got his thing going. And then, of course, Vic, the brilliant man he was, just
Yeah.
took off like lightning. And then one day, here's the funny part. Yolan, my wife, bought this pepper thing, which I could never find a really good one. Finally, she bought this, and I was flipping. I said, "Wow, this is amazing!" Because I put pepper on my things, beautiful. And then on the Saturday paper, I read about this article that these new kitchen things for salt and pepper, and especially the pepper one, was amazing, made by a drum manufacturer, a drumstick manufacturer. And I'm going, what? Vic Firth. So
Right.
I called him and I said, Vic, like, how many lives do you have? And and then he said, you should talk.
Yeah. Right.
But I said, like, I don't understand. Like, it totally in left field. I'm freaking out and enjoying this. Finally, somebody made it one that's intelligent, really good. He said, please help me with this one because now I'm confused. So he
Yeah.
said,
Yeah.
he said an interesting thing. He said, when he started making the sticks, the factory was making other things. So his mother was Italian and cooked a lot. Okay. So they started fooling around. First they did the fruit things, but then he wanted to make things that were really practical in the kitchen. So then
Sure.
that happened. Wow. I mean, you respect somebody like that, and then he supersedes. It's amazing. So, but it also goes with what we do in our lives. I mean, you're a player, and then you're a teacher, then you start the school, then you have the book, and these are parts of what we do. All these other things, it's sometimes seemingly unrelated, right? But they're
Right.
all related.
No, it all comes together. And I mean, Vic was a visionary. So I mean, you know, there's a big market for Vic Firth drumsticks. There's no question about that. But kitchen utensils, that's worldwide. That's
Brilliant.
that's way beyond any kind of limitation. And so I mean, that's brilliant. I had heard about that. I've never actually seen one. Do you still have the pepper shaker?
No, I cannot find it. We moved a number of times and I looked for it. I don't know what happened to it. Sometimes you move and things get
Yeah.
lost and yeah, it's
I
too bad.
have, hey, I mean, and I even hate to say it, I hate to think about it, but when you say that, that reminds me, I used to have a pair of sticks Buddy Rich gave me. I don't know what happened to them. I used to
I
have a
have
picture
mine.
of Billy Cobham and I at the Paiste Cymbal Factory in Switzerland when I went there on that tour when I was 16. And that was earlier that same year was the year that Roy Burns and Robert Paiste did a tour with Rogers Drums
Right.
and
Right.
Paiste 2002 because they were the Rogers had the new Memorlock hardware and the 2002s were new in the States. And so they did a joint tour together where Roy played and they introduced the products and they came here and I already knew I was going to Switzerland, and a great drummer in this community who I always feel like more people should know about and get more credit, who was a mentor to me growing up. First guy that ever got me out on a club stage sitting in when I was a kid is a drummer named Phil Hay. And he knew Robert Paiste, and he was at the clinic and he introduced me to Robert. And I told him I was going to be in Switzerland, and Robert said, "Come to the factory."
Nice.
And so I went, and it was summertime, and at that time, and maybe still, I don't know, you might know better than I. Cobham was living in Switzerland,
He still
but
is. Yeah.
he and his band were there from Montreux, but they came up the same day to the factory that I was there, and so I got to meet Billy Cobham, and we talked about Fran Tarkington and the Minnesota Vikings, and Peter had just joined Weather Report, and we were talking about, and Billy's like, well, Peter's in Weather Report now, and I'm like, yeah, and so we had a picture, and I don't know what happened to that either. You move around, and these things that are precious to you, you can't.
Yeah.
I wish, I wish they were still here, but at least they were there for a minute,
Oh yeah, and they're
part of the journey, But I would love to. I had never seen. Do they? I mean, I doubt it. Is that stuff still in production? The kitchen
I don't
stuff?
know. Now I'm curious. I'm gonna find out, and I'll let you know if I find out. Or if you find out, you let me know.
Joe or somebody would know, right?
Yeah, no, for sure. And now I'm curious because now that I'm thinking about it, I have one of those big ones, clunky, not the same. This was like one hand, and it really worked well. I was wow.
Go figure. You want to know something? When I was at this was 2010, and my first PASIC presentation after the book had come out. Then that was the first year I brought Elliot in, and because he was there with me in 2010 and 2011, and but it was really special having him there in 2010 for that clinic, because that was another game-changing moment. So I remember I was getting set up the hour before in the room there at the convention center, and Vic and Joe Testa and Ben Davies came in to say hello and wish me well and all of that kind of stuff like that. And I had my stick bag and my sticks. I got a pair of these sitting here because I'm fidgety. I can't go too long without having drumsticks in my hand. These are some of these new ones that they have with the Gadamans book, with the tips and stuff like that. But I had some of Vic's, I had my stick bag, and I had Vic's sticks in my stick bag, and he noticed something. And he picked up my sticks and he started looking at it. And I would take a like a Sharpie, and because I use different sticks for different things, right? Different weights, different rooms, and I've got a selection in my bag. And so I would write like here, like 5A, or PE if it was the Peter Erskine model, or something like that. And he looked, he picked up, he noticed it. He reached down, he picked up a stick, and he was looking at it like this, and everybody got really quiet, and it was like kind of like time stopped for a second, and Vic's looking at this, and he says, "Tell me about this." And I said, "Well, I'm using different sticks for different things, and sometimes I want to make a change quick." And I said, "So I draw that in there so I can just peek down at the bag and I can grab the one I want." And he said, "That's a brilliant idea." He said, "But don't tell my research and development department about it, because it would put me back 2 years in production if I did that."
That's funny.
He said, that's a great idea.
Sure.
And I was just like, wow,
Really,
another thing I
really
should mention about Vic, because we were talking about the symphony stuff, and your man in Montreal, right? One thing, having Elliot there, it was okay. So dig this, right? The PAS and I are the same age. They were founded in 1961. That's the year I was born, right? And Elliot and Marv had never been to a PAS convention because they're always working with the orchestra in November. So when I took Elliot, it was the first time he had ever gone. And when he ran into people like Alan Abel and Vert Firth, they all knew each other from the symphony circuit because they'd play in each other's houses on the tours and stuff like that. And, unfortunately, I really can't get into it here because of the language.
Thank
Some
you.
of the stuff. But like once those three got together in one space and started BSing together,
Nice.
My sides were splitting from laughter.
Sure,
they were sharing experiences, and they were making remarks about certain famous conductors that everybody knew, and it was like, oh my goodness. And they were they were the one-liners back and forth, and the way they could answer each other's, and give each other's punchlines, and the whole thing, it was hysterical. I never saw anything like it, and after that, like my relationship with Vic got even cooler.
No, and that reminds me, David, about that's the great thing about things like PIS and COSA. Okay, and
Yeah,
you've been to the COSA in Winnipeg, and you know when
yeah,
any of those events that we've ever done and for years and still doing it in Vermont, for example. I remember we had 1 year 28 artists all week, so you have all these different things going on.
you bet.
And only in cases in situations like that, you in Winnipeg. Remember in Winnipeg, we had Giraldo Piloto.
Yeah.
Was John Riley there? No, Jim Riley.
Oh, Jim Riley,
Jim Riley was there.
Curtis Nowistad.
Yeah, yeah. So it's the only chance we have to really hang out and catch up with each other, you know. And
David
those
Schneider, got to shout out David Schneider.
David,
Because that was my first event like that. It was also in 2010, and it was in we were there in like February before PASIC was in November. I remember how
David
cold
Schneider.
it was.
Yes, David Schneider is Winnipeg. He's amazing. Always has been one of the greatest guys around.
Yeah, beautiful
Absolutely.
man.
Yeah. But I mean,
Yeah.
what I'm saying is like these kinds of events is like when we are able to meet each other and learn from each other. I mean, in the case with COSA, what we do in the one in Vermont, for example, everybody's there for a week, so everybody's eating together. And any of our events, you're there the whole time, so you get to break down to the level where you can hang. Um, between students participants, because I mean we're all students,
Right.
between participants and faculty, and then faculty people can finally see each other. I mean, when do you get a chance to do that if you're not going to one of these types of
It's
events?
got to be PASIC or NAM or COSA or,
Yeah,
yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah.
And that's
No, that was a fabulous event, man. It was so cool. You gave a fantastic clinic. I loved hearing you play. I'm not just saying that because we're here. It was like, I mean, you may not have completed four-way coordination in the book, but your four-way coordination isn't hurting.
thank you. Thank you.
It was just really cool. And then we all jammed together. You remember that? We all
Yes.
jammed, and boy, those cats that were playing. I mean, like Piloto and those cats that were playing with them.
His two
The
percussionists,
volley player and the
Gian Roberto and
yeah, man. I mean, those
Julio.
guys were amazing, and the jam that we got to do, and just so that was, I mean, that was a very empowering moment for me too, because actually David had seen me in the airport in Indianapolis leaving PASIC the year before. And we were on the same flight. He had to go through the Twin Cities to get up to Winnipeg, and he had some of his students there. And I think the plane was delayed and we were waiting. And so I didn't know Dave. And I saw some of these kids had sticks. And so I just started talking to him. And then I just started playing with him and showing him things and all this kind of stuff like that. And Dave watched all that. And then he got my contact information, and then he got my book. And then he was like, I want to bring you in for this. And I had never done one of those before. That was my very
Was
first
that your
one.
first
And
one?
so that was
Wow.
just a wonderful moment for me, and I made new friends. You were a new friend that day. Jim Riley's been a very good friend ever since, and Jim's been somebody I've been able to call and get some advice from, because he was working as musical director for Rascal Flatts at the time. And I took the position as musical director for Sean Johnson, the singer that I tour with now. And so I had some questions about stuff, and I'm like, hey man, can you help me out with this? And of course, and it was all came from just being there together,
Yeah, and that's a good point. I mean, I tell people it's so important to, whether you're invited as a faculty person or not. I mean, you should go to these kinds of things, whether they're clinics, percussion days, or days of percussion, or a COSA event, or any of those camps,
Yeah.
because of course the musician level that is there, you don't get that otherwise. But what happens, and you meet other people who are like-minded and people who will inspire you and become your colleagues on some level, and building your personal network. And that's part of it. I don't talk it up too much, but to me, it's so obvious that friendship and mutual respect that develops, then you build on. And then if somebody's doing something, then you reconnect on these things, and your world becomes much bigger.
And it becomes smaller and bigger at the same time. It's an amazing thing. I talk about that with my students a lot. It took me, because I just didn't know. I wasn't thinking globally for a long time. But when my book came out and I self-published it, that was the first year that I went to PASIC, and that was in 2008. And I had been with Peisty since 96, and they've always been wonderfully supportive of me, and I told you I was at the factory when I was a kid. So that was really exciting. When I got offered the Peisty endorsement by Rich Mangicaro and Eddie Clift back in 96, I was thrilled by that, and easy for me to make that decision. But I remember that when I went to PASIC, like you just were talking about, it was my first time there, but I was only there about, a few hours before I realized I found my tribe.
That's right.
That's how it felt.
It's a good way to put it.
That's how it felt. I went there to try to raise awareness for the book and meet people, and some people, the people that didn't know about it were open to it. Some people shocked me that they were already aware of it. I had Ed Sof come up to me and said, "I want to see your book." And I was like, wow. And it was a beautiful thing. And of course, then my appreciation for the PAS has grown to my involvement in it as a member of the drum set committee, and where I'm on advisory now, and then, working as the drum set editor for Percussive Notes. And I was on the ground for some of the development of this new thing that they've got, the new Drum Set magazine. And I was asked to contribute a little bit about some recommended listening in lead with an article they pulled from the PAS archives, an interview with Max Roach,
Right.
who I had the pleasure of studying with when I was studying with Richard Davis at UW-Madison, because it just so happened, luck of the draw for me, there was a year where they brought both Max and Alan Dawson in as artists in residence, and they alternated months during the school year. So I got private lessons with them throughout the thing, and they did performances, and it really, that was so influential. Madison was amazing that way. I developed a strong bond that lasted until he passed away with Clyde Stubblefield, because Clyde lived there and we worked together, and we would double drum, and he would ask me to drum in his band on like the second set of his gigs in the club so he could go out front and sing.
Really?
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Nice,
yeah.
nice.
The first time there was a Clyde Stubblefield gig in Madison, I actually took the night off. He was playing at a place down my street called Bunky's. That was a cool place. I remember seeing Gary Husband there with Alan Holdsworth, and Buddy played there, and Clyde had the gig at Bunky's coming up, first gig with the Clyde Stubblefield band. I remember it was on a Saturday, and I remember my phone rang. I remember it was on Tuesday, and it was Clyde, and he goes, I can't help it. I do like, I think I'm Mel Blanc sometimes, I do voices. He said, "Hey, Davey, how you doing, brother?" And I said, "Hi, Clyde, what's up?" And he goes, "Hey, man, I got this gig coming up on Saturday." And I said, "I know, I'm going to go." And he goes, "Oh, perfect." He goes, "Because I want you to come and play." And I said,
Nice.
"Play what? Play what?" And he said, "Drums, fool, so I can go out and sing."
Beautiful.
And so there it was, and that became like a lifelong thing. If we, there were gigs where if I was around and he had his band, or if I came, sometimes I go back to Madison, or if he was up in town and he was playing and stuff, he'd always invite me to come, and then he'd step out front. Beautiful. So he could sing. And then we had a gig with a great violinist who lives in the Midwest here called named Randy Sabine, who had a band called Rhythm and Bows, and we double drummed in that band together. And that was amazing too, and because when you're double drumming with somebody like Clyde Stubblefield, the first thing that crosses my mind is, what am I doing here anyway? And then it's about, and so then it's about, well, okay, I want to like Clyde. I don't want Clyde to change what he does, and he doesn't want to change what he does.
Right.
That's where two drummers can be a real drag sometimes, right? Because it's like you end up just playing half your part or something like that. But I realized with Clyde, and Andy Newmark helped me understand this. Actually, that's another story. And I was able to test it and make it work. I could let Clyde do his thing, and I just kind of provided this framework that was like, so like I was the pillars and he was the mesh,
Okay.
because his style is all that percolating, popcorn, syncopated, and I didn't want to get in the way of that. So I just played in a very open way. And the reason I mentioned Andy Newmark about that is because I had gotten to know him based on an interview that he did in Modern Drummer when I was in college that was very influential to me. And then I wrote an article for Modern Drummer years later that talked about that influence. And I was able to get in touch with Andy and discuss some of that stuff with him. And we became friends. And he was telling me how right after he had left Sly Stone's band, he got a call to go on tour with Joe Walsh. And one of the great LA stalwarts on drums, Joe Vitale,
Oh,
was,
yes.
he's been Joe's drummer for years. I mean, I even saw the Eagles on the Long Run tour, and they had Joe playing when Don was up front singing, and Joe was a great utility player because he could play keyboards and even flute and then play the drums. So Andy said on this Joe Walsh tour, he said he had just gotten off a Sly's band. So he said, I had this little kid and the head off my bass drum, and I was playing all these busy beats. And he said, and Joe had this big Ludwig kit with two 24-inch double bass drums and two rack toms and two floor toms and the cymbals and stuff like that. And he said he didn't play anything flashy. He just played big, strong, wide time. And he said, and I realized right away that it worked because, like, I think he called Joe the pillar. He was the pillar. And then and then Andy's was like, and then I had all the little stuff going in between. And I thought, that's what I need to do with Clyde.
Sure,
That's
of
what I need to
course.
do
Yeah.
with Clyde. And it worked, and Clyde loved it, and because the advice that Clyde always would give me, I remember when I was still in college, there was a period of time where he would come see me play, which he did often, and I would go see him play all the time. And one day he was telling me, don't think, Davey, you're getting in your own way. Don't think, and I would argue with him. And, because I was like, but Clyde, I got to read charts and I got to do all this stuff. And so I got to watch my language here. But he listened to me, and then he smiled and he said, BS, and he was like, don't think, get it out of your head. And so when I played with him, that was the thing that I wanted to give him. I'm like, I don't want him to have to think.
Right. Yeah.
I don't want to get in his way. I don't want to create any kind of roadblock. And so he was still just able to express himself freely. And I just was happy to be there. You know what I mean?
Yeah. No,
So,
he was amazing. I wanted to say something about Madison because I mean that seems to be like that base where this all comes from. I actually studied in Madison, but for 1 week, I went to the Ludwig Percussion Symposium
oh,
when they were
sure.
holding there at Madison, Wisconsin. Yeah.
Yeah. I wasn't there for that, but that was only about a year or two before I started college there. And so I've heard about that my whole life from lots of people that were
Oh,
there.
yes. I mean, this was where I was a rock drummer and but was interested in classical, was interested in jazz, but I had no idea. So I heard about this and I went. And so here I am with in Madison, Wisconsin. You had to find it on the map, of course.
Yep.
But the incredible thing is, Gary Burton showed me how to hold four mallets. So I'm in his class, Carmine Appice's class, Lee Stevens' class. Who else was there?
I think Dawson was there, wasn't
Joe
he?
Morello. Joe Morello. I mean, all of this. So that's where, I said, I became a rocket after that. I said, this is the way it's done. And then I met the person who had a shop at the Madison camp was Maury Leishon from the shop in Chicago.
Oh, sure.
Frank's Drum Shop,
Yep.
right? Maury Leishon and his wife, who became like almost my second parents, because then I started buying all my gear from them in Chicago.
Oh, wow. Sure.
Yeah. So Madison has a special restart for me. It was in another chapter. Beautiful. I didn't know it was so musically creative over there and all those people there. Wow.
It was, I mean, Butch Vig, who produced Nevermind for Garbage and went on, or I'm sorry, Nevermind for Nirvana and went on to, put Garbage together and has produced everybody now from, them to Paul McCartney. He's based there. He's living in Los Angeles now, but he was there. He had a studio called Smart Studios where I started doing session work. And Butch was amazing, before he was famous, which is why he's famous now. And so he was there. I was in a band called Pat McDonald and the Essentials for quite a while, which was the band that became Timbuk 3 and had the hit called The Future's So Bright I Gotta Wear Shades. They were based out of there. They eventually moved to Austin, but then I did some work with them too after they became Timbuk 3. It was, did you ever see the Muscle Shoals documentary? And
Yes.
Jimmy Cliff calls it a field of magic. That's how I feel about Madison, Wisconsin.
Yeah.
Madison, Wisconsin was like a field of magic. You had so many, and there were so many great players. I mean, oh my goodness, like the bass players that I got to play with when I was in college that came to study with Richard. Many of these guys are still, out at the top of the industry. And I created a network of friends there that really became the closest friends collectively that I've had in my life to this day, because most of us have all stayed in music
Right.
and have traveled to different corners of the country in the United States, mostly, where we're all active and we all see each other and we still collaborate and we keep up with each other. And sometimes we find out we're in the same city on the same night, and it's a beautiful brotherhood and sisterhood, and then those are very formative years. It's like, I mean, when I got out of high school and got to college, that's when I really started to try to really figure out, okay, who am I, and what do I stand for, and what am I going to be? And I tell you what, when you're around people like, I mean, certainly here at home, my family and my parents and Elliot and people like that, they were great role models. Richard Davis, Max Roach, Alan Dawson, Dr. Marvin Rabin, who conducted the youth symphony I was in, Joan Wildman, who was one of my theory teachers, Les Thimmig, all my professors had me in their bands playing outside of school. I mean, they gave me so many opportunities, and I got to open for Buddy Rich. And, like on one of those things with my saxophone professor, and I mean, just crazy, it's just, and so that's what I try to pass on in my teaching. I mean, I like to open doors for my students. I like to create opportunities for them, when I know that they're ready, and even sometimes a little bit before they're ready. Right.
Yeah.
Just
the
to help
push.
them,
Yes.
get to the next level and start to make a decision. And I used to always tell the students at school too, it's like, look, I mean, just because you're studying the instrument, it doesn't mean you have to make a decision that's going to, necessarily like decide the direction of the rest of your life like it did for me. But, I mean, even if you decide that this is not something that you want to pursue, you haven't failed because you've learned something about yourself. And it's a simple fact, I think, that we can all agree on, that the kind of discipline that you need to learn how to play an instrument, you can apply that skill to anything in life.
Absolutely.
And, and it will help you, it'll help you succeed, if you persevere,
Yeah. I mean, the building of yourself, the alone time that takes, and to have that kind of perseverance to actually stay alone. I remember in my first year of university when I had gone to this camp and came back, and then I didn't know how to practice, so I had to learn how to practice. And I just spent countless hours learning. I had really good teachers, of course, but then the amount of time I spent, all my friends were out skating or out with, partying and stuff. And I'd be there in the studios till 2:00 in the morning, day in, day out. And then, I said, someday this is going to pay off, but you have to do it. You have to
to hold yourself back.
Yeah.
You have to stay true to the course, and sometimes that's hard because it's easy to go have a good time.
Of course.
But boy, the stuff that I would get done when I, all of those days that I said, nope, I got to stay here. They used to have to kick me out of the music building at night, because they wanted to close and go home, and I was still, but even then it was like that's why I had the house off campus in college too, was because I could play at home.
Right.
What I mean? And so a lot of times if I was just on campus for the day, I'd stay there as long as I could. And then if I went home, and I got it worked out. So my other roommates were my fellow musicians in the house. So it wasn't really like, I wasn't bothering people too much if I wanted to practice or something like that,
Beautiful. Now, now get moving. I mean, fast forward to today. I mean, the world has changed in the way we do music and the way in in our world. And it's always an evolution. It's no, is it better? Is it worse? I don't like that discourse. What I say is it's always going to be changing. So you just adapt to the change and you
That's right.
become the person you want to be without anybody or anything stopping you. What would you say to somebody who's studying music right now? Because there are, AI, there's the music world is not the same, the record world is not the same, all of that. What would you give as suggestions and thoughts from mindset?
Life is an improvisation.
Beautiful.
Life is an improvisation. And so if you're going to be a good improviser, you have to have a good skill set. You have to have a fundamental understanding of whatever it is that you're working on. And you can certainly like or dislike certain things, but I've always been of the mindset that, like, I have to learn new things every day when a piece of music is put in front of me. So I have to learn something new every day when it comes to the technology we're using and the opportunities that I'm going to see for my own career. And if I don't want to look that way, I don't want to look back. Everything that I have good in my life that I could look back on are the shoulders that I stand on. And
Right.
the only direction for me is going to be forward. And so I can't be complacent. I would encourage other people not to be complacent. I would just encourage people to be open and understand that, if you're, and like Purdy would always talk about being prepared, right, for the moment. Be as prepared as you can be. You're never going to be prepared for everything. I've got 2 children, I learned how to be a parent by being a parent, right?
Yes.
And I'm still learning, so life is an improvisation. Just show up and be open and be adaptable. And then, use your intuition, and then also use your discretion. If something's not working for you, Richard Davis taught me that if you can't go through it, you learn how to go around it. And then you find your path again, and that's how I do it, and so that's what I would recommend to other people, because again, like we talked about earlier, nothing is guaranteed. So take your best shot.
That's right. Yeah. No, very well said, David. And we can go on for weeks, but
I know.
but yeah, no, there's so much to say, and it's incredible. I mean, just staying positive, and it's a decision. You are positive, and things will be positive because you are positive. It is what you think it is, what you believe it is, right?
Yeah, and it's important to embrace the joy in life, because we all know that the pain will be there. The challenges are going to be there. The difficulty is there because it's just part of the deal. There's no escaping it. And so all you can hope to do is learn from it and learn how to embrace it so that you can rise above it. And it'll keep you from making the same mistakes twice. If you're lucky, or not even if you're lucky, if you're smart, you can avoid falling into traps, and then you can appreciate, like right now, we're talking about right now. I'm so happy to be here with you. And I know this day has been coming, and it's like, and a lot of it is like, oh, I'm so busy, and oh, I want to get this together. But you always think, okay, there's going to be a right time for me to do this, and there isn't a right time for you to do it. You just got to do it.
Yeah,
you just got to do it, and then here we are, and we're having a blast.
Yes, and the other thing, and I want to finish it with, always being, how should I say this? Part of the solution. Always make the situation better because you're there.
Yeah.
And be the part of the solution.
Don't be a solution in search of a problem, right?
No, just the solution, whatever problem it is. Oh, here's the solution, and we'll find it, and here it is.
Yeah.
And
that's right.
Anyway,
both of my sons are looking at careers in music right now, just quite intuitively, because they grew up around it. Their mother's a musician, and she's back to active performing again, which is really great.
Nice.
And I mean, and they're doing really well. I mean, my 17-year-old, who's a senior in high school, we travel around the country, and he's producing tracks for rap artists and getting paid by Atlantic Records, and it's crazy, you know. And then my oldest is starting to sort of literally take the town by storm. He's a blues guitarist, and he's just in love with the thing, and he's the biggest players in town. And I'm talking about people that come out of the Prince camp and all this kind of stuff like that. They're starting to see him now, and they're kind of like, what, you know?
Nice.
Terry Lewis and Jimmy Jam. Lewis did a show with Jimmy Jam's father, who's a legend here. He's 96. His name's Cornbread Harris, and he plays 3 gigs a week. And I used to play with Cornbread back in the 90s, and I got Lewis's band Burning Blue Rain together on a show with Cornbread. And when we were setting it up, Cornbread's son is Jimmy Jam from Terry Lewis and Jimmy Jam, Flight Time, The Time. We were sitting in with Cornbread at a club, and when Lewis started playing his solo, I saw Jimmy Jam's head pop around like from these people he was talking with. And then the next thing I know, he was filming it. And he came up to my son after the thing. He came up and introduced himself to me, and we were talking. And then I introduced him to Lewis, and he said, "Hi, I'm Jimmy Jam." And it's like, well, yeah, we know that. And, you know, it's like, you know, because he looked like Jimmy Jam, man. He had the fedora and the, you know, the black and everything like that. And he was the sweetest guy. And he looks at my son and he says, "You and the guitar are one." And my son looks at me and he looks at him and he goes, "Wow." He goes, "Thanks very much." And Jimmy Jam proceeds to say, "No, thank you. You're a blessing to my ears. How do I keep in touch with you guys?"
Beautiful.
You know, and so then Lewis and I talk a lot about performance and putting bands together and all, and I can pass along what I know to him. We went to another place and jammed together last night, you know, snowing out, but like, he's like, "Dad, you know, he's 20. So he's like, "Can you come with me so we can jam together at this thing?" And I'm like,
Nice.
"Yeah." And he plays and everybody's like, "Wow, kid," you know? So that's exciting for me at this point in my life too, because I'm watching them. I'm going to New York with Max and Los Angeles, and then I'm going to the clubs with Lou and watching my boys just like grow and blossom and seeing it go into the next generation, passing it on, you know?
Yeah, beautiful. No, I have 3, so I know exactly what you're saying. And our daughter is in New York, actually doing a master's at the NYU, and she sent us a video clip of she went to this club, one of her favorite group, and she was right in the front, and they asked for a volunteer. So she went up, and our daughter Angelina is a really good violinist and singer, but she's not studying music; she's studying creative writing. But
Okay.
she's, you know, very talented. So they asked for a volunteer, and she volunteered, and she got up on stage and started singing and knew all the words. So they finally made her sing. That was nice.
Beautiful.
So I mean, it's nice to see them.
It's in her, right?
Yeah. And then the 3 of them are all, you know, I mean, they grow up with this stuff. So, and you want them to be fearless. You want them to be part of the thing and learn how it works and you know, try and make those shoes fit and try and be part of the thing and learn like we did, right? And enjoy it. I mean, with the pain, also the pure joy that all this stuff gives us, right?
That's right. Yeah.
Nice.
And giving them enough rope to let them figure some of that out for themselves too.
Absolutely.
You know, Walfredo and I would talk about that. You know, Walfredo said that he didn't teach Danny or Wally Jr. You know, he got them other teachers because, you know, it made sense. If you got to tell them when to get up and do their homework and everything like that, you don't want to necessarily be on them to practice too. And I also thought, and my sons studied drums for a while too with me. Well, not with me, but, you know, they studied drums but I got a teacher for them as well. I got one of my former students who had just written a book for kids, and I'm like, try it out with my kids, you know, and because I also wanted them to understand that, like, or I wanted to set it up, I guess is the way I should put this, so that if they decided it wasn't what they liked or what they wanted to do, they wouldn't think they were disappointing me if they wanted to stop. Right. I just got out of the way. I mean, because like, look, if you're practicing the drums and you're getting together with Spencer was the name of the teacher, you know, if you want to know anything, if you want to come down and jam with me, of course we're going to play. I know Walfredo did that with his kids all the time, but in terms of just letting them figure it out for themselves, that's important too.
Yeah. No, and all of these things are important, and it's good to give. I mean, to give like we did. I mean, nobody took us by the hand and brought us there, and it's important that we give them that space, that time. And it's sometimes we want to because they say you figured it out, so you want to give them the shortcuts. No. You have to do it. You have to walk with your own feet, open that door with your own hands, and deal with
anything. It's like my focus with them is get home safe, And then on the other side, it's just like, just look at the big picture. Think about all the possibilities of all these decisions you're going to make, make the best choice,
Yep. Listen, David, I want to thank you so much for joining me today. We finally did it. And I only can thank you because I was saying, oh, how is this going to work? Navigating. So I'm really happy we finally got it together.
It's my great pleasure, Aldo. I mean, I admire you so much for everything that you do for
Oh, thank you.
all of us in the community, and I'm drawn to people who give, and that I can learn from, and who inspire others, and you're definitely that guy, and I always look forward to seeing you and spending time with you, and I know I'll see you again shortly, at the PACE convention when that comes up, and I just look forward to it. It's always just my pleasure.
No, thank you, dude. And as I always say, thank you for the compliments, and to be continued.
That sounds good to me.